With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, farm groups are appreciating the additional funding to support water conservation around the state. We'll have more on that. But our top story today, USDA is awarding nearly $4.1 million to organizations and outreach efforts to educate underserved, small-scale, and organic producers on farm risk management and climate-smart farm practices. The funding from USDA's Risk Management Agency provides assistance through its risk management education partnerships for organizations, like nonprofits and land-grant universities. These develop training and resources for producers about risk management options. But the announcement was made during a virtual event that RMA Administrator Marcia Bunger led from her farm in South Dakota.
We've never done it this way before. We've typically selected a spot or a location with one of the partners. This time, though, we had everyone join virtually, and they were able to then read out a little bit and share what their work is going to look like. And I think it was really, it ended up being a really collaborative way to do this.
She says the platform enabled all the programs to engage with each other after a little encouragement.
You know, when we were listening to the different presentations from the individual partners, I quickly put in the chat, please share your contact information with others. And so they quickly did. And so I think it now begins another level of relationship building. It was really amazing to see everyone sharing in the chat their contact information, because I don't think they've ever realized before all of the other partnership announcements.
She says all 50 states will benefit from the outreach efforts that were funded. To find a farm risk management program in your area, you can visit the USDA RMA website. Coffee is a very hot commodity, even during this record hot summer. Gary Crawford brews up this report.
And now, here's a 1946 movie scene that's set in a coffee shop. Roll that film.
I want a cup of coffee. Okay, Mr. Black.
Just a cup of coffee.
That will be 20 cents, please.
Whoa. Stop the projector. 20 cents for 2 cups of coffee? Wow. It's no wonder U.S. coffee consumption reached its peak in 1946, with the average American consuming that year almost 46.5 gallons of coffee. Things went along pretty well for coffee until the 1970s, when coffee consumption began to turn downwards. So the average American in 1946 drinking over 46 gallons of coffee. By 2005, that was down to 24 gallons and still falling. What happened?
It's a combination. It was the use of the percolator, which is the worst way to do it.
That's Arando Holmes, a coffee grower, roaster, and marketer. He grows coffee in Honduras. And yes, he says first there was the electric percolator, which really took hold in the 50s and 60s. Those machines depended on boiling the water to get it to brew the coffee. Boiling is too hot and would often give you very bitter coffee. So one factor was the percolator. Another, competition from soft drinks and a consumer shift away from breakfasts.
And also the coffee companies started using more and more Robusta coffee, which was a third of the price of Arabica beans, trying to make higher profits, but they just made bad coffee at the same time.
But finally, the tide turned. A new era of coffee started to brew in the 2000s.
Some of the coffee companies made it more fashionable, and people started looking for even better coffee. 100% Arabica, well-raised, top grade, roasted right.
He says once people tasted good coffee, demand for it started to rise, not just because of the coffee itself.
You know, it's a social thing.
This is Karen Blakesley, Extension Educator, Kansas State University.
People like to hang out with friends or meet with colleagues to have a work session and to go have a cup of coffee.
And that coffee's far different than in the past.
They've added a lot of flavors to them to enhance people's idea of what coffee's supposed to taste like.
Oh, it's a new world of coffees. I sometimes go to the drive-through coffee shop and my daughter will ask me to bring her
a hot grande caramel macchiato with almond milk.
Or maybe
a hot grande chestnut praline latte.
Well, I got to write all that down. Also, for home brewing, there are those single-cup brewing machines.
That's added a whole nother dimension to the market.
And a different sound as well. So all of this is bringing coffee consumption up from a per-person yearly average of 24 gallons in 2005 to over 35 last year. However, Health experts are voicing concerns.
Do you really need all that caffeine?
We'll take a look at the pros and cons of that in a future report. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
You are listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. In today's National Spotlight, varying weather conditions across rural America have opened the door for not one, but multiple diseases to infest a grower's field at once. Chad Smith has more.
It is possible to protect against a broad spectrum of diseases while maintaining a high yield potential. Brian Norton, an agronomic service representative with Syngenta, talks about weather conditions in his area and the current conditions of corn and soybeans.
Recently, we've been very fortunate with our growing conditions. We've had just enough water to keep everything growing well, but not too much water where we've had a lot of flooding or overly saturation. Our corn and soybean crops in the state of Missouri, at least, look really good. We started off with good dry planting conditions, which allowed for some planting to take place very quickly and get that stands established. Unfortunately, the month of May became very, very moist and very, very wet, shut us down for a few weeks. After that, we moved into June and July, where again, we continued to get periodic rain like you would want. That early moisture led to a lot of early disease pressure in some of our crops. Corn, we see a lot of gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, and even some tar spot, which is getting well established across the state of Missouri. Soybeans, some early frog eye leaf spot, probably some of the earliest frog eye leaf spot I've seen in quite some time.
He talks about some of the main diseases to watch for after a lot of moisture.
For corn, historically, we'd really thought about 3 diseases that we were pretty focused on: northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot, and then we would have southern rust. The last few years, though, tar spot has become a pretty prevalent disease, especially across the northern third of Missouri and into Illinois and Indiana and those areas. And all of those, when you put them together, they require some moisture. And a year like 2024, where we've gotten plenty of moisture in the growing season, we've seen the whole mix of those. It's not uncommon to walk into a cornfield and really find all 3 of those diseases. And now here recently, seeing southern rust even blow into those fields as well. So you flip it onto the bean side of things and seeing a lot of frog eye leaf spot, some cercospora leaf blight is more of our traditional diseases that we're seeing in soybeans. But again, with the moisture, they're definitely coming on strong.
Norton makes his crop protection recommendations.
Whether it's corn or beans, a lot of these fields, we're not dealing with just one disease. We've got a whole gamut, a broad spectrum of diseases. So it's really important when you think about choosing your fungicide offering that it provides you both a broad spectrum disease protection as well as fungicides that also offer the greener aspect, that being some plant health benefits. So Syngenta's got a nice lineup of our adepidin and solatinol technology products, things like Miravis Neo or Miravis Top with the adepidin molecule, or Trivapro with solatinol, that offer broad spectrum disease protection, but also very good plant health benefits, even in low disease years. I talk about how good the growing conditions have been across the geography, but there's pockets, of course, that have missed those rain events and experiencing a little bit of drought stress, and having a good broad spectrum fungicide with cleaner and greener can help you be more consistent in your yield.
To learn more about protecting your corn and soybeans and preserving yield potential, visit boostyourbushels.com. Always read and follow label instructions. Chad Smith reporting.
Optimism abounds on Wall Street after the Producer Price and Consumer Price Index is released. Today comes retail sales, consumer sentiment tomorrow. A clean sweep can catapult the Dow, many suggest, back to near the 52-week high, 41,376. Sentiment remains strong that the Fed, rather than call an emergency meeting this month, will cut interest rates by a half a point next month. Soybean futures remain at 4-year lows to start the day after the negative crop report. China by far a top buyer, but current marketing year sales lag last year's pace by 85%. November soybeans may have another 20-25 cents to go before buyers feel comfortable stepping in.
That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's Dennis Guy with the Livestock Report.
The Canadian Cattle Association says that while the U.S. presidential election is less than 3 months away, the organization will continue to reinforce with American legislatures at state and federal levels the reality of how important cross-border trade is to the economy of both the U.S. and to Canada. The USMCA Trade Pact Review is coming up for its initial review in July of 2026. Nathan Finney, a cattleman based in New Brunswick, says that his organization is working to stay well ahead of that agreement review. Finney, who is also president of the Canadian Cattle Association, says that exporters of all products, including his organization, has faced strong headwinds from Republican and Democrat trade policies in recent times. Former President Trump, running under the Republican banner, has been promoting an across-the-board 10% import tariff, and the current Democrat administration is pushing a Made in America agenda. But Nathan Finney says that his organization, in tandem with Canadian trade officials, will continue to be relentless in their ongoing mission to keep products moving smoothly across the border.
Had the Democrats, some of their trade policy of putting in a voluntary product to U.S. And we've heard Trump's platform of tariff rates catastrophic, to be quite frank. So we're going to really focus on that to ensure that the points are well positioned why we have the world's largest integrated live cattle system. We're tasked to feed the world and be an economic driver, which we are. We need to continue to ensure that we don't have barriers in place.
And while the American presidential election is taking center stage right now, Canadian export-oriented organizations believe that the needs of individual states and their legislative representatives will provide the underlying strength and impetus for ongoing international trade movement. Nathan Finney says the Canadian Cattle Association sees their primary thrust over the next 2 years to have ongoing discussion with legislators at both the state and federal levels in preparation for the USMCA review in the summer of 2026.
It's very valuable to get ahead of this. When we get into these negotiations, the goal is to ensure that beef remains able to move back and forth without any political interference. I think we need to continue to work on our relationship building with all different groups and parties, whether it be governing states, senators, members of Congress, and make sure that these relationships are fundamentally sound. 70% of our trade is with the U.S.
Reporting from Canada, I'm Dennis Guy.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with a preview of what you'll hear today on AgNet West, here's Brian German.
The Pacific Coast Coalition Dairy Business Innovation Initiative has announced its 5th round of grants offering $1.5 million to dairy processors in several states. Applications from dairy processors in California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington will be accepted until September 30th. 6 to 10 awards of up to $250,000 each will be granted through the initiative. The grants are intended for projects that modernize, expand, or market the use of regional milk into higher value products. This includes improving production processes, product development, packaging, and marketing. Zoom sessions on August 29th and September 19th will be held to assist with applications. Funded by USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, the initiative aims to strengthen and innovate the dairy industry. More information about the grant program is available at dairypcc.net. The USDA's recent $400 million investment to support water management in the western U.S. is getting significant praise from industry groups. The American Farm Bureau Federation and National Association of Conservation Districts both expressed support for the move, emphasizing the importance of addressing drought conditions that threaten farms and ranches. The funding will help irrigation districts implement water-saving technologies and practices expected to conserve up to 50,000 acre-feet of water over 250,000 acres. Farm Bureau President Zippy Duvall stressed the need for flexibility in deploying these resources, while NACD President Kim LaFleur highlighted the collaboration with local conservation leaders. Officials from several western states, including New Mexico, Oregon, and Colorado, also welcome the investment, seeing it as a way to help farmers innovate and build resilience against drought. The Inflation Reduction Act has helped provide significant additional support for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. NRCS California State Conservationist Carlos Suarez highlighted where the additional resources have been put to use.
The Inflation Reduction Act has been instrumental in supporting farmers and ranchers and forest stewards in the state. We have seen a significant increase in resources, and those resources have been used to promote climate-smart practices, such as irrigation water management. We also have work on air quality practices, in addition to forestry and building forestry resiliency. Even though with the unfortunate events of fires that we have in the season, but we still are able to work with private forest owners and not only address those fires, but also build fire resiliency and forestry resiliency to fires in the state.
California Rangeland Trust will be hosting a grazing technology webinar next week. The webinar will begin at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, August 20th, and will highlight topics including what the technology is and how it works, virtual fencing on public lands with permitted cattle grazing, and the costs associated with implementing virtual fencing on a ranch. Speakers will include personnel from USDA's Agricultural Research Service, UC Cooperative Extension, and USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. California rancher Mike Williams will also be highlighting his experience with virtual fencing technology over the past few years. Other topics of discussion will include collars for goats and sheep, possible funding sources, and using the technology for targeted grazing for weeds, fire breaks, and riparian areas. More information about the webinar is available on the upcoming events page at agnetwest.com. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
Why the weather is hard on some southern crops. That's coming up on this line of ours.
For all the good crop and weather news coming out of the Midwest,
we do still have some bad news out there.
Mostly coming out of the south central part of the country. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says Texas is getting the brunt of some extremely hot, dry weather.
We have seen triple-digit heat almost every day this month so far in much of Texas. A lot of areas have been quite dry, and that has led to some deterioration of rangeland and pasture conditions, and also created some pretty significant stress on immature summer crops.
Not to mention stress on producers. And to make matters worse, Rippey says
this pattern is not going to change. We have a very strong high-pressure system parked over the south central United States.
How long is it going to stay parked where it is?
At least until this time next week.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. An expert has some suggestions for making sure that brown bag school lunch does not make your child sick. Gary Crawford has more.
For many parents, back to school time is celebration time.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
My goodness, where did this come from? Ooh.
With the kids back to schooling and mothers carpooling and teachers so dear.
So dear. Oh my. Oh my goodness, that's enough to make you want to cancel school again. But anyway, many parents are preparing so-called brown bag lunches for their kids to take to school, even though most food safety experts do not recommend actually using brown paper bags.
Unless you're using things in your lunch that are totally non-perishable.
You know, apples, peanut butter sandwiches, granola bars, chips, things like that. This from Meredith Carruthers, a food safety expert with the Agriculture Department's Meat and Poultry Hotline, the number of which we'll give you in a minute. She says even with a frozen gel pack in a brown paper bag, it's not insulated, and so...
The biggest concern is that those foods aren't going to stay cold enough, and therefore bacteria that can cause foodborne illness are going to start multiplying, potentially by the time you go to eat your lunch. And then if you eat your lunch with that bacteria on it that has started to grow, you can potentially get sick, and that's what we don't want.
So try to use a good insulated lunchbox or bag with a frozen cold source. Meredith says with that as a starting point,
you can pretty much take anything for lunch. You just have to make sure you're storing it properly until you're ready to eat it.
Keeping it below 40 degrees. Meredith says that needs to be done even if you're taking leftovers, things like leftover pizza. It's got to be kept cold. So what about, I got an idea. What about taking a chicken leg, something like that, freezing that, using that item as the cold source in the lunchbox? So, Meredith, how about that idea? That's your reaction? What's wrong with that?
The big concern is that when that food starts to thaw, those foods will thaw from the outside in. The outer layers of that food, any foodborne illness bacteria that might be present, start to get exposed to that air temperature. And if it's not below 40 degrees, that bacteria can start to multiply. They can multiply to a point of creating toxins that are then heat resistant, won't be killed by reheating, or if your child is eating that frozen food cold, it won't be good and could potentially get them sick.
So keep that in mind. Also, she says we might want to put in that lunchbox or bag some hand sanitizer or hand wipes. So if you have questions about packing a school lunch, any food safety topic, you name it, just call the Meat and Poultry Hotline. Here's the number, 1-888-MP Hotline, 1-888-MP Hotline. And if you call between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern Time, you'll be able to talk to a live expert, always better than a dead one. You might even get to talk to Meredith, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
The decision to retire can leave you with mixed emotions. Here's Chad Smith.
A study from the Alliance for Lifetime Income revealed that half of Americans ages 61 to 65 have retired, and many have mixed emotions about the decision. After a lifetime of working, rural Americans can find themselves with a loss of purpose and isolated from people close to them. Sean Voskuil, Oklahoma State AARP director, says the transition to retirement can be jarring.
Deciding to retire can bring on a string of emotions, from anxiety, sadness, to loss of direction and financial security. Retirement blues can hit anyone, no matter how ready they are for the next phase of their lives.
Voskuil says retirement can mean freedom from the everyday grind of working, or it can leave you feeling lost.
It can leave you feeling lost with no purpose in life. Married couples can find being together all the time challenging. Retirement can be hard, but there are steps you can take to make it a success.
Voskuil says there are a number of steps that can help, including structure in your days.
Maintaining habits and routines is vital for mental health. You can also set small goals to help give you a sense of purpose. It's also important to grow friendships, especially in rural areas. Social isolation can lead to depression. Considering an encore job or volunteer position can lead to better mental and physical health. Last but not least, give yourself the flexibility and time you need to figure it out.
Learn more Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Central Time on RFD TV or online at aarp.org/AARP Live. Chad Smith reporting.
The inclusion of data sets previously part of the fall USDA crop production forecasts resulted in some interesting information in the August report. Here's Rod Bain.
A unique August report from USDA. Chief Economist Seth Meyer says what made this month's crop production report significant is the addition of data sets previously submitted later in the year.
It's a bigger month than it has been historically, and part of this is the move by NASS to introduce the FSA acreage earlier into the production estimates. It used to be October before that FSA data were complete and to the point where they could use them reliably in estimating production. Improvements to the FSA data have pulled that forward, September last year and now August this year.
Combine that with the first yield estimates of this year's summer crops, and there were some notable numbers. For instance,
corn still not the highest production number, the third highest production number, despite the fact that yields jumped 2.1 bushel an acre from what's our weather-adjusted trend yield.
Soybean production is forecasted record high at nearly 4.6 billion bushels, fueled by both increased planted area and expected record yields.
Interestingly, also lost nearly 1 million acres of wheat when it comes to winter wheat, down a little over 300,000 acres. Our spring wheat areas, both Durham and other springs, down more than 600,000 acres.
And cotton production is expected up 25% year over year. Meyer says just as interesting as the USDA production forecast with the new data sets included is how trade projections compared and how markets reacted. Using corn as an example,
NASS estimated corn production at 15.1 billion bushels. That's right in the middle of the trade estimate. What did the trade base that upon? Did they do well on yield and area estimates? Because they lost over 700,000 acres of corn planted area from the June acreage report to this estimate. With that, we see corn futures up a little over 6 cents.
As for cotton,
Below trade expectations, and not by a little bit, by probably below the bottom end of trade range by 700,000 bushels. And part of that coming up from a loss of cotton area of more than 500,000 acres. So 500,000 acres less cotton area than suggested in the June acreage report based upon FSA data, and yields not much changed.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. What about humates in animal feed? When can you add humates to the animal feed, and what is the benefit of that?
So the interesting thing about animal feeds is just like the fertilizer side, there's actually a lot going on in legislative processes. So there's an act out called the Innovative Feed Act. And currently, you can't include things in animal feed that are giving you other benefits besides nutritive benefits. Let's say, for example, you had a cow that was eating a product that reduced its methane emissions, those enteric gases that are caused just in the natural digestion of a ruminating cow. You can't claim that those products do that benefit. So hopefully people will get involved and say, look, the Innovative Feed Act is necessary and should help farmers. Other benefits of feeding humate is obviously first to reduce enteric gases. But the second one, these are old plant materials. So those plant materials are rich in trace minerals. So not only are you getting something that's going to help the digestion of the animal, you're also getting an abundant supply of minerals. So that is the main reason farmers are currently including in their animal feeds.
This is all fascinating, but it can be hard to retain some of this information when you're hearing this on the radio or through the podcast. So is there someplace online, or where can our listeners go and get more information?
Well, the good news is the acts I mentioned, like the Innovative Feed Act and the Plant Biostimulant Act, are publicly available through Congress. You can actually go look at those acts. They're on the website there. The other information you can get is directly through Live Earth Products. So if you go to liveearth.com, contact us. You can contact us and our agronomy team. And we're happy to go over any details, questions about how to use these products, how they fit your farm program, how to use them as a tool to implement conservation practices such as nutrient retention, water conservation, and improving soil health.
To get to know more about Live Earth Products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Here is this week's Almond Update.
This week's Almond Update from the Almond Board of California highlights a segment from the Almond Journey podcast, where host Tim Hammerich had an opportunity to speak with Nav Athwal of Trinet Farms and Terra Ag Ventures at the Almond Conference back in December about his perspective on growing a farming business.
When I think of farming, it's a long game. In my prior career, I was in venture. Venture is the short game. You know, you're trying to flip a business in 3, 5, 7 years, and either you're trying to take the business public or you're trying to sell it to Amazon or Microsoft, and all the venture investors make, 20x or 100x their money. That's not farming. Farming is the long game. If you look at any sort of index on farm returns over 10, 20, 30-year periods, they're up and to the right. But if you look at the volatility year to year, there's peaks and valleys. So you have to have a long-term mentality when it comes to farming, and you can't just look at it in year-to-year format. Because if anyone looked at almond farming today, they'd say, this will never make sense. But there were times when it made a lot of sense. So the first thing I did was I wanted to assess whether my investors understood that. Do they understand that this is a long game? And there were some investors that initially wanted to participate, but once I explained that to them, oh, this is a 10, 20-year lockup of your capital, they just said that's too long for me. So my investors are actually some of my best friends. They're folks that I either was a college roommate with, or folks that, I golf with, or folks that I've just grown up with. And so all of my investors, one of which includes my brother, are folks that I trust and that understand what it takes to be successful in farming, the patient capital, the employee investment, the diversification. So I think I was very fortunate to be able to partner with folks that, one, believed in me, and two, believed in the vision of this is long term. But look, the population's increasing. The amount of fertile land is decreasing with urbanization. The need for food is not going away. Yes, there's interesting technologies like vertical farming, et cetera, that may meet a small fraction of the overall global calorie need, but healthy foods like almonds and, plant-based protein alternatives to meat, that's here to stay. It's not about, is it going to grow? It's how much it's going to grow, and how do we accelerate that trend both domestically and abroad? And I think they bought into that.
Yeah. And what they're buying into is a farming company, not just the land, right?
Yeah, so they're buying into the farming company, but their main investment is in land acquisition. So what I was thinking about when I joined the company, in my background, I've done a lot of capital raising. I've raised capital both for businesses as well as for some of the specific needs of the business that I ran previously. So raising capital for me was something I had a lot of experience with. And so what I tried to do was say, okay, as a family, we've grown quite a bit. How do we think about diversifying our capital sources? Because a lot of families are out there, they're asset rich, all their money's in their farms. And if something happens, there's a lot of risk to that family business. So for me, it was, I want to grow. I see an opportunity in almonds, but how do I do that with not just the family capital being utilized? So these investors have bought into that specific land that we grow almonds on. And so they're part owners of that land, but they're not out there on the tractor. They're not out there, doing the mummy shaking, but they're out there often enough to understand what it takes. So, they come around once a month, maybe twice a month. They get on the quad, they get to drive around the field. And I've purposely kept my investor base very small because I want to have that one-on-one intimate relationship with each of them, which predates the farming partnership, so they can get a feel for what it takes to be a farmer, and enjoy all the benefits of that.
Yeah. Your background in real estate and land use as an attorney, does that help you in the acquisition process as far as like coming up with creative ways to find and acquire new land?
Yeah. So what I love about farming, Tim, is it's way more complex than people think. And I love complexity, probably a little too much. So, if you think about my background, when I first started my career, I was an engineer before deciding to go to law school and become a land use and real estate attorney. And then I ran an operating business where we were focused on KPIs and scale and growth. And when I first came into farming and decided to take my dad up on his offer to help him, I was like, well, this is not gonna keep me satisfied. It's gonna be boring. It's farming. And I realized it marries all those interests. There's engineering aspects to it. There's an operating business. There's a real estate business. And so all of those skills that I'd acquired over the decade and a half prior to joining the farming world, I've been able to utilize. So going to your question of land acquisition, absolutely. From title review to looking at the purchase and sale agreement to being able to diligence the appropriate things, it's really come in handy, all the different transactions I worked on as an attorney. But I think the thing that's come in most handy is just the water. As we know in the West, we don't get enough rain to grow a crop without supplemental irrigation, and a lot's changing. Let's forget about the commodity volatility, the tariffs, the COVID shipping impact. Let's just think about our most limiting resource in the West, in California. I don't care if you're in Sacramento Valley or in Kern County, water is critical, and we often don't have enough of it. This last year was an anomaly, but it'll go back to dry years, and we're all going to be talking about it again. The New York Times is going to be writing about it again. And one of the things I worked on a lot as an attorney is navigating complex regulations to find beneficial solutions. That helped both the stakeholders, but also appeased the governmental regulators. And so I think I've become a water expert over these last 3 to 4 years. As I've gotten to know every nook and cranny of water law, water regulation, where it's fair, where it's unfair, and how we can take an acre foot of water, 6 inches of water, and stretch it and be able to do recharge and be able to take advantage of, EQIP grants and other things. So I would say that part of it is where I've spent a lot of time and built what I think is an advantage both for our family business and our third-party investor business. And it's so much fun. It's at times infuriating and complex, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody who likes complexity, I could see where that would be fun.
Yeah, at times enraging, but fun nonetheless.
But it does seem like, although farming has always been a complex endeavor, it seems like the complexity is just getting more intense.
Absolutely.
I mean, water rights and all the regulation, everything.
Yeah, if you go down, we're sitting at the Almond Conference here today. If you go down to the expo hall and look at all the vendors, there's 2 or 3 buckets they fall under: water efficiency, automation, and then nutrient management. So let's just focus on those 2. Labor. We're in a very difficult time from both a hiring of labor standpoint, but also the expense of labor. Luckily we're not like a lot of farms that were, harvesting requires a lot of manual labor. We can do that through shakers and sweepers or machines. But labor is so critical, but labor is also where all the risk is, from OSHA to just the minimum wage going up. It's making farming less and less economical. And so the automation piece is a forcing function. I would say every year I've come to this almond conference, the amount of automation technology has only grown because these companies know labor is going to be the biggest challenge for any farmer in California and in the US, to be honest, going forward. And then the second is water, right? Like, how do we take the efficiency we're already employing on our farms, switching from flood to drip or going from, flood to micro sprinklers, et cetera. And how do we introduce additional layers of that? How do we do recharge? How do we bring in soil moisture monitoring? How do we bring in dendrometers? How do we take advantage of grants from at the state and federal level to do that? Because those are your two most limiting inputs, and profitability for any farmer, let's just look at almonds, for example, in the future is going to be based on how are you managing your water and how are you managing your labor? Everything else is out of your control. How many almonds India or China is buying year to year? The almond board's handling that, and I think they're doing an amazing job. I listened to their state of the industry, and I think they're just hitting all the pieces right. But what you can control as a grower is how you're spending money on the farm, with your two biggest costs being water and labor.
Mm-hmm. What did ag producers pay last year for farm production expenditures? And what was the breakdown of such expenditures by various categories? Rod Bain looks into it.
It might surprise some how much ag producers pay for expenses. Case in point, in 2023,
U.S. farms, and this excludes Alaska and Hawaii, spent almost $500 billion on expenses necessary to run their farms and ranches. Farm expenditures were $481.9 billion in 2023.
And according to USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service Administrator Joseph Parsons,
that's up 6.5% from 2022.
Other highlighted data points from USDA's latest annual look at farm production expenditures for the four major expense categories: feed, livestock and poultry, farm services, and labor.
Each of those are really substantial and make up about half of total expenditures.
The report also broke down last year's farm production expenditure totals by categories, such as average by farm.
Average per farm expenditures in 2023 was $255,000, and that is up from 2022.
By commodity,
expenditures are higher for crop farms at nearly $300,000, $298,000 to be specific, than for livestock farms, which was $220,000. Livestock farms tend to include more smaller operations.
Farm size.
The very largest farms or larger farms that go between $1 million and $5 million in farm value sales have the largest category of farm production expenditures.
Region.
In the Midwest region, think Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, that region accounts for 31% of U.S. total production expenditures, with just over $150 billion, and that's up 4.6% from 2022.
And state.
The largest state expenditure is in California, and they contributed the most to the 2023 total at $52.7 billion. And it should be said that the California production expenditures are up nearly 15% from 2022. Iowa, which is the next largest state in terms of farm production expenditures, had almost $38 billion in farm production expenses.
Parson adds, for the next look at the other side of the farm balance sheet, the Economic Research Service will publish its latest farm income estimates on September 5th. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halverson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halverson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.